Good evening. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG, and this is Nycos Nightly News. I'm your host, Game Master Jay, and with 50 years of experience, I know pretty much what's going on all the time, all over the world. And this report is brought to you by the 3G Network, Gnome National News, and we will get right to our stories today. Before we get to our actual news story, I do want to let you know that this report's coming to you directly from the city of Tenerif, where there's been a serious amount of activity today, and this report comes to you literally on the heels of that activity. So let's prepare by going to our map first so that you can see precisely where we are. And let's hop to the map. Alrighty, and today we are looking at... Where is it? Oops. That's not it. Pardon me. So professional. Okay, there it is. All right, so we are coming to you directly from Tenerif. It is the capital of a country, little-known country, that has established itself once again in the news through the city of Tenerif. Whoa, wrong thing. So we'll go ahead and botch that, and we're going to start over. Let's... Whee! Alrighty. Oh, I'm so professional. I'm trying to get this stuff figured out, but... Alrighty, we're going to start that over again. This will be clipped in post-production, of course. Alrighty, take two. Welcome to NycosRPG. This is Jonathan Albin, your host, Game Master Jay, for the Nightly News. We have several stories to go over tonight. In particular, one is coming to us from a city that is well known for its operations in both the business and criminal element fronts. So let's go to our map really quickly and go over this. This is the map, of course, of Nycos, and we're going to be looking in particular tonight at, and once again, there we go, the city of Tenerif. Now, Tenerif is a city of about 10,500 personnel. It is a coastal city that supports the inner workings of the country of Cenobia and other points inward from there in terms of trade and commerce, and has the largest known collection of families that are involved in the oligarchy of the country itself. And we have more stories coming from that in particular, but let's go directly to our Tenerif report. Alrighty. And where did I go? That's very funny. Alright, there we go. Alrighty, so these nine points that we're going to cover tonight are coming from Tenerif, the financial heart of commerce. And the first thing to note is that this was the beginning of the first night of a citywide consortium. It'll be the first meeting of the 20 heads of state of the country of Tenerif, and this night was marked with violence right here in the main city streets, just west of the financial districts. Witnesses reported citing the mysterious nobles that have been making waves of both of a social and a economic basis in the city, suggesting possible interworkings that have not been met with the approval of the city council, and this is therefore drawing attention to them. It is known that the minor skirmish surrounded a seeming automaton accident that occurred in the middle of the afternoon that was of Jagala's name. Mon Jagala has been embroiled in this mystery for the last couple of weeks, and so the media, of course, immediately dispatched a reporter. We'll get back to a story on him in a moment, but the reporter was quite specifically close to the action. Now, the wonderful thing, the good thing about the city's advanced police structure is that there were constables on scene almost immediately to take control of the scene, and a couple of them were known to be there to in the act of saving lives and preventing additional loss of life. Now, the media, of course, in Tenerif is often given misleading reports and such, but in this case it was quite evident that there was some form of altercation. According to the constable's report, several unsupervised youths were considered to have been the cause. It seems that they ran out in front of one of the automata as they were moving from one point of the city to another, caused a automata of the Jagala family to leave the roadway and roll over. The personnel inside were considered to be in great danger, and so the constables took quick action to authorize the opening of the container, the actual transport itself, in order to provide solace and rescue to those who were trapped within. It was known that the vehicle, almost immediately burst into flame, and there were several who reported that there might have been a mechanical issue with the rig, to which there will probably be charges filed with Jagala for running unsafe equipment in the city. Now, fortunately for the Nycos News Network, the Solomor agent was able to rapidly respond and was almost immediately on site and attempted to ask questions of the individuals shortly after their retrieval from the burning wreck. Now, we do have an image of one of the persons that may be involved, but more importantly, we have exclusive image coming to us specifically of one of the three individuals, and in particular one of the potential nobles that was pulled from the wreckage. And he was he definitely represented himself because he was in such a state of shock that he inadvertently bowled over our reporter. So let's see what I can do about bringing that up. Do we have a way to get a hold of that image? Let's go ahead and check on that. Just a second. Yes. It's similar to an image that was taken a couple of weeks ago when the individuals were said to have arrived. But let's go ahead and bring that up if we can. Thank you. Let's go ahead and, as you can see, it looks to be a giant red panda. He does wear the colorations of the Salafort kingdom from which he is believed to have come. But speculators have considered this might actually be a direct image of King Tonderu himself of Salafort, and if so, it does suggest implications between the Jagala family and interlopers from the Northlands. This would be the first time in close to 50 years that there may be a conflict on the horizon between the southern kingdoms and the northern kingdoms that haven't seen action in more than 1,000 years of peace. If this is true, if this is King Tonderu, we might be looking at formal charges being laid upon that kingdom by Tenerif for unfair involvement in local politics. But we don't have confirmation of that at this point. Alrighty, so now this appearance of King Tonderu only answers part of the problem, as we had confirmation that it might have been a queen rather than a king that was involved. So there are questions about whether there might be a broader spectrum conspiracy than we thought, as there were two rather distinctive Eldrin dignitaries that were also extracted from the wreck. The Eldrin did appear to be a child, and what may have been the first example of an Altan extremist. And this is a cause for alarm, because if it is true that one of the Ixal has actually survived to this generation, we might be on the edge of something even bigger. Now, what's interesting is all of these are of course, speculation at this point, because we don't have any eyewitnesses that have come forth. But the authorities are in particular on the lookout for a particularly dark-clad Feline seen fleeing the area, and the authorities are looking for that individual for questioning. So if you or anyone you know are aware of any of these individuals, either this alleged sighting of a giant red panda, or of a dark-clad feline, or any strange or uncommon Eldrin in your community, make sure you reach out to the constables or to the consortium itself. Alrighty, so we are going to be finishing this portion of the story now. We're going to be going to the commentary section, if you will. So please stand by while we make that transition. Alrighty, this is Jonathan Albin, Game Master Soapbox. This is a sub-show of the Nycos Nightly News, and tonight we're going to be talking about something that I like to term the return of recess. If you are familiar with the concept, and even if you're not, when we were children in this fine country of ours, when you went to public school, you would have a period of time segmented from your learning activities, referred to as recess. Now, I know I probably explained way more than I need to, because most of us remember what recess is, but I want to talk about it from a different aspect, and that is when we are involved in our lives and we're moving through the activities of the day, we sometimes forget ourselves and become concerned that we are only our occupations. And today I want to talk a little bit about the idea of recess itself. Now, the idea of a recess, of course, back when you're a child, is, quite frankly, children need to have time to play. It's instrumental to their development. And so public school, private school, homeschool, all provide time, ample time, if you will, or arguably at least, ample time for the children to create the social interactions and the social connections that we, as humans, need to develop so that we have a healthy culture developing. Ooh, I did a dangling participle there. Wow. The idea, therefore, of recess was segment time out. You know, you work hard on a class or two, then you take a break, and then you go to recess and you engage in playfulness and games and exercise, some cardio. And in that break from the classroom, it allows your brain sort of to go through the process so that when you come back into the class after the break, you can, be refreshed and ready to learn again, because learning is hard work. So The issue that I'm trying to address here with the Nycos Launchpad is that in the concept of our daily lives, sometimes we hold on to mechanisms that we feel have worked, and then in other cases we completely abandon them because either someone has advised us that they don't work, or they seem counterproductive, or perhaps they're too expensive, or they're too risky. There are a million different reasons why we abandon plans and programs. Well, I know that when I went through school, and I could probably, when I was an old guy, when I was a young man, there I said it. Recesses were for kids from kindergarten all the way up to what is now the beginnings of middle school age, so 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. And in my case, I was in the world of education, if you will, that tended to include what are considered to be the junior high classes as part of grade school in most communities, and there were some that would then, on the other hand, move them up to calling it junior high school, and those 2 or 3 years were transitional until you finally established in high school. Well, for me, that was a fair piece ago, and when we talk about recess, I want to talk about some of the things that might represent. Now, my notes here are not as consistent as usual because I've been doing some other things today. But when we talk about recess, I want to talk about, do you remember it? Do you remember what it was like? The idea is that you're watching the clock. You're doing whatever your project was in the class, but you're watching that clock because you know at 9:17 we're going to release, and then we'll have 6 minutes or 7 minutes to get to the playground, and then we get half an hour, 45 minutes, and then the bell will ring and everybody comes running back in and you retake your seats. Well, recess in the minds of a child, of course I'm not one anymore, so some people would argue that I am, but the mechanism that occurs in the mind of a child is you've been working on learning something, you've been bringing data into your brain, and whether you enjoyed it like some, like me, or if you hated it like some, my sisters, the idea is that you got to the break and all of a sudden you were free. You could disconnect, you could unburden your brain, and there were a whole lot of facets that went into it. But I wanted to know, do you remember it? Do you have memories of it? If you do, please share them with me. Go ahead and include them in the comments. I'll be glad to respond to them. But in this time of remembering recess, what is it you remember? Well, gosh, for me, so long ago, I can't remember any of the individuals I went to school with. I moved 40 times before I was 18. I went to 22 different grade schools and 6 different high schools. So I don't remember anybody in particular. I remember the activities. I remember you played like limited organized sports, like they'd pull together a game of kickball or whatever, and then you had your smaller, less organized games where there was patterns like 4 square or 2 square, ball bouncing games, and then of course there were jump ropes, and there was playground equipment. So a lot of different things that you could get involved with. The idea was that all of them were to help burn off the natural emotional energy that children have, let their brains kind of dwell on the things that they've been learning, but to kind of clear the palate, so to speak, so that when you go back into the next section of classroom, the blood's flowing through your system, and you're oxygenated, and you're arguably you're not traumatized, although that also happened in playgrounds, right? But the idea is that you remember recess as that break. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's see. Well, isn't that special? Oop. All right. So once you got back from recess and you went back to work again, your brain of course, was now. I have to say the school sort of indirectly started with recess every day because you would get to the school in advance of your classes beginning because parents always want to make sure you get there early, so you're getting there. Maybe you got 3 minutes, maybe you got 10 minutes, maybe you have a half an hour to engage with your playmates and your friends before the classes start. But then once the classes start, then the first real recess break seemed to be hours after you began. And that break process, now that it's got you prepared for, moving on in life or whatever. Ooh, let's see here. Now that you're ready to move on to the rest of the class or whatever, now you've got a clean palette. You don't necessarily remember specifically what you were working on. Whatever marks were made for words that would be in your spelling list, the principles of math you were covering or whatever. When you think about what recess does, one of the things that I have a problem with is that as we got to be into junior high and high school, granted the subjects were more intense, there was more information to be compiled and crushed into the brains of the young folk, but at the same time we were trying to become adult. Our world doesn't work on the concept of recess. We don't think about it in those kind of terms. Now, in adulthood, sometimes we consider our weekends to be the equivalent of our recess. Some people take the advantage of their, free time on the weekend to do all of the kinds of same enjoyable, physically active, interactive, socially connected activities that we did during recess. But the reality is that transition from grade school to junior high to high school, there's a dynamic that was being invoked that I think we as human beings kind of let, no pun intended, but just like in sports, we dropped the ball on. When we got to junior high and into high school, we completely eliminated recess. We said, no, when you're here for school, you're here to work. And so you learned about the things that adults need to know. You learned about scheduling and deadlines and keeping appointments and propriety in speaking. We no longer could just shout out our answers. We had to, raise our hands and wait for a moment for the instructor to take a break and answer them. But the idea is that when we stepped away from recess, we sort of took a major step away from being childlike, because the attention span issues that we see today are often attributed to ADD, ADHD, the autism spectrum, and I'm not trying to dissuade or diffuse any of that. What I am trying to say is that the normalization of isolation leads to desperation. And I think that's one of the biggest pressures we put on our lives, is that we stopped enjoying the living and turned the living into the occupation. Matter of fact, if you talk to anybody today and you're just having a glib conversation, what do you normally say to the individual? You say, what do you do for a living? That's mechanically the way we say it. What is it you do for a living? Well, the problem with that is that we do far more than our occupation for our living. Yes, we do it for our income, and I think if we said that a little bit, it might make us a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about it, because if I want to get to know somebody, I want to know who they are. I don't want to know what they do. I mean, we certainly appreciate knowing what somebody's occupation is, but when we define it in those terms, we cut out so much of who we are. I used to be considerably more involved with the faith community than I am today, but when you are involved with the faith community, they emphasize the fact that you should define yourselves in terms of what you believe. And that's great. I do agree that that's a great concept. If somebody asks me who I am, I might include I'm a believer. I may include that I am a writer. I might include that I'm a storyteller and game master. I might say, well, I'm a historian. There's so many subsections of who we are that we never share with anybody, and I think it's partially because we forget recess. Because when you were a kid and you jumped out onto the playground, yeah, you might gravitate to your friends, but if there was always that new person in the class or that person that's transferring from another school, they became interesting. We wanted to engage and interact with them, get to know what their experience was like, try to figure out where they're going to fit in the local pecking order. For those who are already in the pecking order, how do you rise and fall? Who are your friends? Who do you have lunch with? These are all things that gave us as kids defining characteristics, so that when we met people, we had stuff to talk about. Oh, I'm taking this, when you get to junior high, of course, then you go to what classes are you in, and that actually starts to presuppose occupation. Oh, you're in a math class. Oh, you're in a science class. Oh, you're in shop. There's all kinds of perceptions that get tied into nominatives, what we call ourselves and what we call each other, that it becomes clear, almost block-like defined. And I think this is one of the arguably one of the worst things about Dungeons and Dragons and role-play games in particular, is that role-play games put you in the same kind of pigeonhole in occupation. When you walk into a town in character and you are stepping to the bar, everyone at the table, everyone in the room is assessing what's your class. What do you do for a living? And I think that's sort of messed up because it gets far away from who we really are. And the more we codify and qualify, the more we ostracize, the more we set up limitations. And I think that's dangerous. When we are a culture and we are playful with each other and we are engaged. I mean, when we go to the questions about recess, when we were older, when we get to junior high and they took away recess from us, what was our thought? What crossed through our brains? I know some of the things that crossed through my brains was, okay, I'm going to have less time to socialize. I'm going to have to try to work in a conversation at the beginning of a class, or I've got to, maybe it was partially programming us to, and I say programming in a really negative way, and I don't mean to, but we become normalized, if you will, to the way we process information and what we share with each other. And doing so makes it so that we aren't as dynamic or whatever. And of course, then we start to place labels, introvert versus extrovert, even, cultural things like, well, you're from this background or from that background, or you came from this side of the tracks or you came from that side of the tracks. And all these narrative definitions actually in long term fail us, because when we do this, when we accept those limitations, we put ourselves in a box to actually, if you will, restrict our own capabilities. Pardon me for a second, I've got a big sound issue going on, I just noticed. All right, so that seems to be better. So I hope that fixed the problem and that I don't have to completely redo the show. But the idea is that our disavowal of recess and our desire to move into a world where these major breaks are taken away from us, I think we kind of fall into a trap. Now, in modern culture today, too, there are mechanisms within our operation systems when we look at what the law says about what an employer can and can't require of us. It's understood that a workday is so many hours and that a break must occur every so many hours, and you get a lunch break of so many minutes. And all of these things are good because they give safety so that somebody doesn't get abused or overworked or whatever. But they also deprive us of some of the really important aspects of being human. If we work in a building where we only have a 10-minute break every 2 or 3 hours, then we only have 10 minutes to go from our place of work to do whatever and to come back, to be back by a certain time. And that barrier, that chronological barrier, almost prevents us from actually engaging with one another because we won't have time. Now, certain habits, such as the smoking habit, allows certain people who have that habit, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, is of course the idea of smoke and secondhand smoke being in the workplace. We've certainly done everything we can to abandon those, even though the government has done what it can to hold on to the tax revenues from those, if you would call them vices. They definitely try to hold on to that. They didn't make it illegal or whatever. They've made it so that it's quantified and controllable. But that becomes the only way of actually creating something to talk about. And when you have to talk about a vice, that seems almost counterculture, If you said, okay, you got a 10-minute break to talk philosophy, I'm sure everybody would become a philosopher. The idea of saying, well, you need to have, if you're going to take the 10-minute smoke break, you got to be a smoker. What does that say? So, but even with that, a 10-minute break, we can't get to do anything. There's no real time for any cardio calisthenics exercise. There's no time to socialize and get out of our bubble. And more importantly, I think that from a cultural standpoint, it deprives us of the ability to disconnect from our work so that we can process the things that we're involved with. And so I'm advocating for the idea of a return to recess, that an employer who is holding you to a schedule should be able to open that schedule up and look at it in terms of productivity compared to profit. I know that the school districts constantly fight with this, whether it be, do we have a 9-hour work school day and include periodic breaks between classes? Obviously, there's some time in between. An opening schedule gives some opportunities, but they almost never give an opportunity for the concept of a recess. There's not necessarily a quote game room in the school that you can retreat to. Even in public schools, often when they had inclement weather or whatever, they would still be providing you the recess time, but you were either operating in a gym or you were using that time for board games or that kind of thing. And so there were some of those, but only in the years when you had recess. Once you get to junior high, you might get a what do they call it? A study hall hour or study break, and you could go and sit together and do things. And as a games person, as an RPGer, junior high and high school was optimal for me because I could take all of my study hall hours and turn them into story creation hours. I spent hours and hours drawing maps and creating monsters and all of that because most of my schoolwork I was able to do within the parameters of the school day hours. But the idea is that the connection with other people suffered because even in a study hall situation, you're to remain kind of silent. Even if you're allowed to speak to one another, it has to be hushed tones, and you don't get to be yourself in those instances, and you're having to convey the person that they are hoping you will be someday. When you get into high school, it's far more regimented, and I'm not an authority on the education process. I'm not going to draw any direct arrows and point at anything in particular, but the idea of keeping a child occupied from 7 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night with activities that don't allow them to experience being and experiencing and enjoying who they are sets them up for an uncertain future. They don't know who they are. By the time they do get to college age, which some would argue that they're not even ready for adulthood until, 25 because of the development of the cortex. The idea is that in those formative years, if you're not able to process the interaction with other people, you're naturally going to be less interactive. And I think that recess teaches a lot of benefits. In another video, I'm going to go through the benefits of a recess and why we should be including them in our daily activities. Also in a future video, I'm going to be going over the days of the week and why I had to rename them all, but we'll carry that on in another video. I do want to thank you for watching so far. If you haven't yet, make sure you like and follow the show so you can be kept appraised of any new videos that we produce. We are on the on the air every night at 11 p.m. Pacific time, generally speaking, somewhere around there. And I'm always bringing information about the games that I'm running, but also about gameplay in general. And of course, now with the Launchpad, a lot more information on how we can focus our life differently. And this concept of recess really is important, because when we take the time to disconnect and, perhaps we meditate, perhaps we go jogging, perhaps we put on our roller skates and go down the street at, breakneck speeds and try not to die. These are all things that we can do that help us to disconnect from the drudgery of humanity, because the reality is that we have a limited amount of time here. Granted, everyone believes that they are immortal, if only for a limited time, as Rush would say. Rush the group, not Rush the talking head. But the idea is that we're only immortal for a limited time, and then after that we have an expiration date. And as we go through our lives, if we want to extend our time on the earth, there's three ways to do it. One is stop time, which generally you can equate to the adrenaline junkies, because it's been proven that when you put your life up into a stressful point, time actually does seem metaphorically to stop, or at least slow down considerably. And so some would argue that adrenaline junkies are really about slowing time. Second way of doing it, of course, is extending your life, which means live a healthy life, eat the proper foods, stop the bad habits, and work towards survival. The very idea of our duration of the earth having an expiration date, and pushing back that expiration date in ways that allow us to continue our activity and our livelihood and our forward progress. These are all essential. And then finally, of course, the last way is to find ways to go into the timeless spaces. And recess, if you really think back on it, recess is the ultimate example of a timeless space, because every time you start a recess, you are aware that you're only out for a certain amount of time, but you're going great guns, foot to the floorboard, go, 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 because you know that time's going to end. And yet you're always surprised, because the amount of time that you've compressed into that gave you infinitely more time, if you will, for living. And so I am advocating for recess in particular, because I want us to spend more time in the timeless spaces. For me, that's tabletop roleplay games. That's engaging with people in the virtual creation of the alternate realities that are game worlds. Whether you are a game master or a player, you slip into a timeless space, because the game is going on where time is irrelevant. You can pass 2 or 3 days in a story, you can pass a month in a story, you can pass decades in a story if that is the intent of the story. You can even go backwards in time. As a matter of fact, that's a watchword on the world of Nycos, is that there are times when the arrow of time gets reversed. But that's a completely different subject. So At this time, I'm going to be going ahead and calling the end of the show. I want to make sure we get out before we get to that next commercial break. I'm Jonathan Albin. This is NycosRPG. This has been Game Master Soapbox and the Nycos Nightly News. I want to thank you for your presence here, and we'll see you in the next show. If you want more information, do check us out